The evening had a golden hue to it, the kind of sunset that paints the sky in shades of amber and rose, reflecting off the glass windows of high-end restaurants nestled in the heart of the city. Inside one of these establishments, the chatter was lively, the ambiance sophisticated but not overbearing. Soft music played in the background, the sound of a piano, its notes weaving through the laughter and conversation of diners. Henry and Maria Gallagher sat at a corner table. They were not an ordinary couple, and yet they tried to be. Henry, with his salt and pepper hair and tailored suit, was the picture of success. A man who had built a life from the ground up, a self-made millionaire with his name etched into the foundation of every company he had touched. To those around them, he was a business mogul, a name synonymous with power and wealth. But to Maria, Henry was just the man she had fallen in love with over 3 decades ago when they were both still young and struggling. Maria, even now at 58, was radiant. Her smile, a delicate but enduring curve, could light up a room. She had aged gracefully, her once fiery red hair now touched with streaks of silver, though her eyes remained as bright as ever, a deep blue that could still stop Henry in his tracks. In a room filled with younger, wealthier couples, Maria shone the brightest, simply because she was kind, graceful, and content. She had always been that way, no matter how much or how little they had. Tonight was meant to be a special night, though Maria didn't know it. She thought it was just another dinner out, a break from their hectic schedules, a chance to reconnect. Henry had planned to surprise her with an anniversary gift, a trip to the Mediterranean, the place they had dreamed of visiting but never quite found the time for. It was supposed to be a symbol of the life they had built and the adventures they had yet to take. Life had gotten away from them, as it so often does. Their children were grown, their careers at their peak, and the years had slipped by faster than either of them could have imagined. Henry watched Maria from across the table, his heart swelling with love and admiration. She was speaking, her hands moving animatedly as she described a charity project she was working on. Maria had always been passionate about giving back, about helping those less fortunate. She never let Henry's fortune make her forget where they came from, and that was something he loved most about her. As he listened, Henry's hand moved beneath the table, reaching into his coat pocket to feel the small velvet box that held the tickets to their Mediterranean escape. He smiled to himself, imagining her reaction when he finally handed it to her after dessert. She would laugh, perhaps scold him for spending so much money on a trip, but her eyes would light up with excitement. He could see it so clearly in his mind. Their future stretched out before them, filled with new memories, new places, new moments to treasure. But then something happened, something so small at first that Henry almost didn't notice. Maria paused mid-sentence, her hand moving slowly to her chest. She looked confused, almost as if she had forgotten what she was about to say. Her eyes lost focus for just a moment. "Maria?" Henry asked, leaning forward, concern flickering in his voice. She didn't respond. "Maria?" His voice sharpened. This time he stood, moving around the table to her side. She was breathing, but her breaths were shallow, as though each one was a struggle. She clutched her chest tighter now, her face turning pale. "Help!" Henry shouted, his voice slicing through the restaurant's peaceful ambiance. Panic spread like wildfire. The waitstaff rushed toward them, and within minutes, the manager was on the phone with 911. Henry knelt beside Maria, his hand gripping hers tightly. "It's okay, Maria, it's going to be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. The ambulance arrived quickly, but to Henry, it felt like an eternity. Maria's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and she looked at him, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. Her hand fell limp in his grasp, and her eyes closed again. This time they didn't reopen. "Please stay with me," Henry choked out, his voice breaking. The paramedics worked swiftly, loading her onto a stretcher and wheeling her to the waiting ambulance. Henry followed, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not tonight, not to Maria, not to the woman who had been his strength, his rock for all these years. He climbed into the ambulance beside her, never letting go of her hand, whispering words of love, of promises, of the life they still had ahead of them. "You can't leave me, Maria. We still have so much to do. You've always been the strong one." As the sirens wailed into the night, Henry's mind flashed through their years together. He thought of the small apartment they had shared when they were first married, barely scraping by but blissfully happy. He thought of the birth of their first child, the way Maria had glowed with pride and joy. He thought of the late-night talks, the long walks on summer evenings, the laughter, the tears. He thought of all the moments they still had to live, the grandchildren they would spoil, the vacations they had promised themselves. They reached the hospital in minutes, though the ride felt endless to Henry. He clutched Maria's hand, watching as the medical team rushed her through the double doors. The doctors and nurses took over, their faces set in professional calm as they did what they were trained to do. Henry was left standing in the sterile waiting area, the sound of his own heartbeat roaring in his ears. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Every tick of the clock was a punch to his gut. His mind spun with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not ever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged. He walked slowly toward Henry, his face solemn, his eyes filled with the kind of pity that only came in moments of irreversible loss. "Mr. Gallagher," the doctor began, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but... That one word shattered Henry's world. It was the final blow, the end of everything that had ever mattered. "No," Henry whispered, his legs buckling beneath him as he sank into the nearest chair. The doctor spoke again, offering condolences, explaining the cardiac arrest, the efforts to revive her, but Henry barely heard a word. His mind was stuck on one thought. Maria was gone. For a long time, he sat in that chair, staring at the sterile white walls of the hospital, numb. Nurses passed by, patients came and went, but to Henry, time had stopped. Everything had stopped. Eventually, he was allowed into her room. She lay there, peaceful, as though she were simply asleep. Her hand was still warm when he took it, and for a moment, he let himself believe that if he just held on tight enough, she would wake up, and this would all be some terrible dream. But dreams don't last, and neither did that small, fragile hope. Henry stayed by her side for hours, talking to her, crying, laughing even as memories flooded his mind. He told her about the trip he had planned, how she would have loved the blue waters of the Mediterranean, how they would have walked the cobbled streets of old villages and watched the sun set over ancient ruins. He told her about the life they had built, the family they had raised, the love they had shared. He told her that he wasn't ready to say goodbye, that he didn't know how to go on without her. But as the hours slipped by, reality set in. Maria wasn't coming back. She was gone. Forever. The days that followed were a blur. Funeral arrangements, condolences from friends and family, the cold, empty mansion that had once been filled with laughter. Henry found himself lost in the echoes of the life they had built together, now quiet and still. The trip to the Mediterranean never happened. The tickets remained in the velvet box, a painful reminder of the future that had been snatched away in a single heartbeat. For the rest of his life, Henry would carry Maria with him in his heart. He would carry her laugh, her smile, her kindness. And though the world would move on, Henry's world had changed forever. Because in the end, even a lifetime together felt too short. And Henry would have given everything, his fortune, his success, his very soul, for just one more moment with her. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the ones we love are taken too soon. Sometimes all we are left with are memories and a longing for the time we lost. And so, Henry learned a lesson too late. Time is the most precious thing in the world, and love is all that really matters.